So, very good evening to all of you present here. I, Dr. Krishna Sinhamahapatra, welcome you to the fifth lecture of the lecture series Non-Fictional Prose, which is hosted by BARTI Pune, that is Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Research and Training Institute, Pune. And here are my details. We already had 4 lectures in this series already. And if you have gone through the other lectures, you will already know certain important aspects about this topic. And keeping that base in mind, we will go ahead with the fifth lecture. You can connect with me right now in the live chat box because this is a live session. If not, you can actually connect with me on my YouTube channel, which is Krishna's Canvas, after the lecture is over. As I said, this is lecture 5. And as we head towards lecture 5, I would like to take a quick revision as to the idea of non-fiction. How or what do we mean by fiction? What is non-fiction? What are the genres which come under non-fiction? And what are the sub-genres which come under the idea of non-fiction? All these ideas need to be clear. If you want to have the basic idea of this paper, which is Yes, so right now I'm not able to share my screen, but however, I would like to continue with the concepts. So, as I was saying, lecture 1, all those who have missed it can actually go back to it, where we have discussed the idea of non-fiction. So, I would briefly make that idea clear for the students who have joined today for the first session. That is, what do we mean by non-fiction? So, the texts, the writings which do not come under the bracket of this term, which is termed as non, or rather, which is termed as fiction, will be referred to as non-fiction. And when we read any non-fiction, usually it's in the prose form, we see that the form is devoid of, mostly exclusive use of literary devices. It is more about the matter. When we say matter, it's about the facts. So you will see that if there is some kind of clinical research which is done, if there is any particular research which is done based on facts, some kind of research related to numbers, about economical facts, then when we are talking about it, we are reporting about it, then we do it by using factual data, and to support the factual data, we use a prose which is not majorly literary in its sense. And definitely, it is not about imagination. It's not about creativity as much in the sense it's about the way you are presenting your facts in a very logical way. So logical, fact based writing, and where you are relating the different incidents which you want to report to. One of the ways of talking about nonfiction is travelogues. You must be seeing that nowadays there are different travel blogs and travel vlogs. And if you see the write up content of these writings, then you will be able to understand what nonfiction talks about. So, when we are talking about a place which you have visited and you want to tell that, you are not using your imagination to create something which is not even existing. You are talking about the facts, you're talking about the places which are there which you would like to tell. Then we are also talking about autobiographies, for example. So when I'm talking about autobiographies, in autobiographies, autos is the self, right? So when you're talking about the self, you're giving a study, you're giving the details about the self, which is termed as autobiography. So as we were discussing non-fiction in Indian writing, we discussed about various autobiographies which are covered under this ambit. And specifically, we would like to, talk about autobiographies which are more related to the facts. Again, there are other kinds of nonfiction as well, but the main idea in nonfiction, as we discussed, is the lack of fictional elements in it. When fiction brings in the idea of imagination, fiction brings in the idea of imaginary and creative content in the human mind. Now, while we were discussing about the inception of the idea of nonfiction and how it started, we referred to the literary criticism and the books and works which contribute to this field of study. So, literary criticism, in that aspect, we were discussing Plato, or we were also discussing about Aristotle and their idea of different things around them, and how they have actually put in their views and their ideas in a very factual way or in a very factual method. Then there are encyclopedias, there are things wherein you get information about different aspects of knowledge, and it helps you to get real facts out of it. From now on, I will be joining using my laptop. So, just for 1 minute, I will be sharing my PPT. So, stay with me as I share my PPT. Yes. So now I'll be sharing my PPT. Just a minute. So now we will take up a few more examples in order to understand the idea of, uh, you know, non-fiction, how it helps us to get facts, and how it is an interesting way of learning things, getting informations. So hopefully the idea non-fiction is clear now. So till lecture 4, we have discussed quite a few examples, which I would request all of you to actually go through and understand and relate to them, so that if there are any questions from any of these non-fictions or the texts which we have taken, you will be able to answer them. Yes. Now, as we were discussing, we will be getting into the discussion of a few more non-fiction works, and the area which we have taken for study today is American and European works. We discussed about some of the important works in the previous lecture as well, and today we will be going ahead with some further discussion. So, Henry David Thoreau, we had discussed about him and the idea of civil disobedience in our previous lecture, but only the highlight we are going to talk about now. If you want a detailed analysis of it, please refer to lecture 4. So it's Thoreau's idea of civil disobedience, which espouses the need to prioritize one's conscience over the dictates of laws. So what is it? Espouses the need to prioritize what? One's conscience over the dictates of laws. It criticizes American social institutions and policies, most prominently slavery and the Mexican American War. So, Thoreau's civil disobedience talks about one's conscience, that is, a human being's conscience, over the dictates of laws. So, how somebody's conscience is more important than the dictates of laws, and criticizes American social institutions and policies, most importantly, slavery and the Mexican American War. Another of his work, which is Walden or the Life in the Woods, which is a series of 18 essays, is a contribution, and rather an important contribution, to New England transcendentalism. The book was a record of Thoreau's experiment in simple living on the northern shore of Walden Pond in eastern Massachusetts. So, Walden is viewed not only as a philosophical treatise on labor, leisure, self reliance, and individualism, but also an influential piece of nature writing. It is considered Thoreau's master work. So, Walden is considered to be Thoreau's master work. Now, it is considered his masterwork, and this is how it looks like. So, the resulting book is a series of essays. Hopefully, I'm audible. Let me just check once. Yes. So, as we were saying, that this particular picture gives us an idea of how Walden looks like, and what exactly it would kind of be the imagination of the writer, that is Thoreau. So it's a series of essays, means not only just one, that but there are quite a few essays in this series, and in which he discussed his experiment and included a detailed account of the construction and cost of his cabin. So Thoreau extolled the benefits of literature in reading, though in the following essay sounds he noted the limits of the books and implored the audience or the reader to live mindfully, being forever on the alert to the sounds and sights in his or her own life. So, solitude praised the friendliness of nature, which made the fancied advantages of human neighborhood insignificant. Later essays included visitors, higher laws, winter animals, and spring. Then comes Rousseau, who was born in Geneva in 1712, was one of the 18th century's most important political thinkers. His work focused on relationship between human society and the individual and contributed to the ideas that would lead eventually to the French Revolution. So Rousseau, born in Geneva in 1712, was one of the 18th century's most important political thinkers. His work focused on the relationship between human society and the individual and contributed to the ideas that would lead eventually to the French Revolution. And the work which we are referring to is the social contract. So his early work argued that the development of civilization had actually led to a decrease in happiness and that humans should live instead in a state that was as close to nature as possible. So the social contract, with its famous opening sentence, man is born free and he is everywhere in chains. So dear students, this is something which you need to understand when you are preparing for net set, and it is a lesson for life as well, that though we are born free, we are all the time in chains. Instead, that people could only experience true freedom if they lived in a civil society that ensured the rights and well-being of its citizens. So being part of such a society involved submitting to the general will, a force that transcended individuals and aimed to uphold the common good. So, being part of such a society involved what? Involved submitting to the general will, a force that transcended individuals and aimed to uphold the common good. Existentialism is a humanism, book by Sartre. So, we are going to talk about it now, which is an important work and you need to have a strong understanding of it. So, few philosophers have been as famous in their own lifetime as Jean Paul Sartre. So, many thousands of Parisians packed into his public lecture. Existentialism is a humanism. So, this term existentialism and humanism is important here. So, few philosophers have been as famous in their own lifetime as Sartre, and many thousands of Parisians packed into his public lecture, which was termed existentialism is a humanism. Towards the end of 1945 and the culmination of World War II. That lecture offered an accessible version of his difficult treatise, what is it? Being and Nothingness, which had been published 2 years earlier, and it also responded to contemporary Marxist and Christian critics of Sartre's existentialism. So, that lecture offered what? An accessible version of his difficult treatise. What is it? Being and Nothingness, which had been published 2 years earlier, and it also responded to contemporary Marxist and Christian critics of Sartre's existentialism. Now, I would like to know if anybody in the who are online right now knows what existentialism is. Anybody? So, we do hear about existentialism when we are talking about theory and the different theories which we are part of, right? So, Yes, so now we are back. So, that lecture offered an accessible vision or version of his difficult treatise, which is Being and Nothingness, which has been published 2 years earlier. And it also responded to contemporary Marxist and Christian critiques of Sartre's existentialism. So, Sartre was much more than just a traditional academic philosopher. However, and this begins to explain his renown. So, he also wrote highly influential works of literature inflected by philosophical concerns like nausea, the Roads to Freedom trilogy, and plays like No Exit, Flies, and Dirty Hands, to name just a few. He founded and co edited late Thames Modernists and mobilized various forms of political protest and action. In short, he was a celebrity and public intellectual par excellence, that is, public intellectual beyond excellence, especially in the period after liberation through the early 1960s. Responding to some calls to prosecute Sartre for civil disobedience, the then French President Charles de Gaulle replied that you don't arrest Voltaire. Now, we will be discussing the myth of Sisyphus, wherein throughout history, some books have changed the world. They have transformed the way we see ourselves and each other. They have inspired debate, dissent, war, and revolution. They have enlightened, outraged, provoked, and comforted. They have enriched lives and destroyed them. One of them is the myth of Sisyphus. So, inspired by the myth of a man condemned to ceaselessly push a rock up a mountain and watch it roll back to the valley below, the myth of Sisyphus transformed 20th century philosophy with its impassioned argument for the value of life in a world without religious meaning. And it leads to this idea of absurd. You must have heard about drama of the absurd or absurd drama. So Camus suggests is a matter of facing this fundamental contradiction and maintaining constant awareness of it. So facing the absurd doesn't entail suicide, but on the contrary allows us to live life to its fullest. So Camus identifies three characteristics of the absurd life, which is revolt, freedom, idea of freedom, and passion. So we must pursue a life of rich and diverse experiences. Now we are taking up the text, which is The Prince. So, The Prince is an extended analysis of how to acquire and maintain political power. It includes 26 chapters and an opening dedication to Lorenzo de' Medici. The dedication declares Machiavelli's intention, what? His intention to discuss in plain language the conduct of great men and principles of princely government. So the dedication declares Machiavelli's intention to discuss in plain language the conduct of great men. How is the conduct of great men and the principles of the princely government. He does so in hope of pleasing and enlightening the Medici family. So he does so in the hope of what? In hope of pleasing and enlightening the Medici family. So book's 26 chapters can be divided into four sections. What are they? Chapters 1 to 11 discuss the different types of principalities or states. Chapters 12 to 14 discuss the different types of armies and the proper conduct of a prince as military leader. Chapters 15 to 23 discuss the character and behavior of the prince, and chapters 24 to 26 discuss Italy's desperate political situation. So, the final chapter is a plea to the Medici family to supply the prince who will lead Italy out of humiliation. Now, what are the types of principalities which are discussed? So, Machiavelli lists four types of principalities, that is, hereditary principality, which are inherited by the ruler, mixed principalities, that is, territories that are annexed to the ruler's existing territories, new principalities which may be acquired by several methods by one's own power, by the power of others, by the criminal acts or extreme cruelty, or by the will of the people, civic principalities, and then ecclesiastical principalities, namely the papal states belonging to the Catholic Church. So, hereditary principalities or principalities, mixed principalities, new principalities, and ecclesiastical principalities. Types of armies. So, a prince must always pay close attention to military affairs if he wants to remain in power. Machiavelli lists four types of armies. One, the mercenaries or hired soldiers, which are dangerous and unreliable. Number two, auxiliaries, troops that are loaned to you by other rulers, also dangerous and unreliable. Number three, native troops composed of one's own citizens or subjects, by far the most desirable kind. Then mixed troops, that is a combination of native troops and mercenaries or auxiliaries, still less desirable than a completely native army. Now comes the character and behavior of the prince. So Machiavelli recommends the following character and behavior for princes. It is better to be stingy than generous. It is better to be cruel than merciful. It is better to break promises if keeping them would be against one's interests. Princes must avoid making themselves hated and despised. The goodwill of the people is a better defense than any fortress. Princes should undertake great projects to enhance their reputation. Princes should choose wise advisor and avoid flatterers. So these are certain points which we need to remember and take a note of. Then comes Italy's political situation. So Machiavelli outlines and recommends the following. The rulers of Italy have lost their states by ignoring the political and military principles Machiavelli enumerates. Fortune controls half of human affairs, but free will controls the rest, leaving the prince free to act. However, few princes can adapt their actions to the times. The final chapter is an exhortation of or to the Medici family to follow Machiavelli's principles and thereby free Italy from foreign domination. So this is what the final chapter talks about. That is, the rulers of Italy have lost their states by ignoring the political and military principles Machiavelli enumerates. So, fortune controls half of human affairs, but free will controls the rest, leaving the prince free to act. However, few princes can adapt their actions to the times. The final chapter is an exhortation to the Medici family to follow Machiavelli's principles and thereby free Italy from foreign domination. Next, we come to another very significant work, which is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So, has anybody heard about this work, which is titled I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings? Any idea who is the writer of this? 6:30. So, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which is so you have to keep in mind who is the writer of this particular work and what kind of significance does this work have. So I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings talks about Maya Angelou. It talks of her idea as a writer and how she has written and composed this. It is a very, very important aspect, a very, very important work in the world of black women writing about womanism and the ideas of freedom, the idea of how you can attain freedom. So, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is a 1969 autobiography describing the young and early years of American writer and poet Maya Angelou. The first in a 7 volume series. So, there is a 7 volume series, and it is the first in a 7 volume series. It is a coming of age story that illustrates how strength of character and a love of literature can help overcome racism and trauma. So, what is it about? The first in a 7 volume series, it is a coming of age story that illustrates how strength of character and a love of literature can help overcome racism. So, can help overcome racism and trauma. So, the book begins when 3-year-old Maya and her older brother are sent to Stamps, that Arkansas, to live with their grandmother, and ends when Maya becomes a mother at the age of 16. So the book begins when 3-year-old Maya and her older brother are sent to Stamps, Arkansas, to live with their grandmother, and ends when Maya becomes a mother at the age of 16. So, in the course of Caged Bird, Maya transforms from a victim of racism with an inferiority complex into a self possessed, dignified young woman capable of responding to prejudice. So, in the course of Caged Bird, Maya transforms from a victim of racism with an inferiority complex into a self possessed, dignified young woman capable of responding to prejudice. So, we have to keep in mind, as I said, this book is very, very important in the history of black feminism, and how it really kind of became very, very important work in the field of creating identity for women. So it is the first in the 7 volume series, and it's a of age story that illustrates how strength of character and a love of literature can help overcome racism and trauma. The book begins when 3-year-old Maya and her older brother, so you have to keep in mind the names of the characters, and her older brother are sent to Stamps, Arkansas, to live with their grandmother, and ends when Maya becomes a mother at the age of 16. So, in the course of Caged Bird, Maya transforms from a victim of racism with an inferiority complex into a self possessed, dignified young woman capable of responding to prejudice. This is what you have to keep in mind. So, Angela was challenged by her friend, author James Baldwin, and her editor, Robert Loomis, to write an autobiography that was also a piece of literature. So, Angela was challenged by her friend, author James Baldwin, and her editor, Robert Loomis, to write an autobiography that was also a piece of literature. Reviewers often categorize Caged Bird as autobiographical fiction because Angela uses thematic development and other techniques common to fiction. But the prevailing critical view characterizes it as an autobiography, a genre she attempts to critique, change, and expand. So, reviewers often categorize Caged Bird as an autobiographical fiction, which you have to keep in mind because Angela uses thematic development and other techniques common to fiction, but the prevailing critical view characterizes it as an autobiography, a genre she attempts to critique, change, and expand. And since it is critically acclaimed as an autobiography, we are studying about it here. The book covers topics common to autobiographies written by Black American women in the years following the civil rights movement. So, what does it do? It covers topics common to autobiographies written by Black American women in the years following the civil rights movement, a celebration of Black motherhood, a critique of racism, the importance of family, and the quest for independence, personal dignity, and self definition. So, The book covers topics common to autobiographies written by Black American women in the years following the civil rights movement. So, this movement, civil rights movement, is also very important in the study. A celebration of Black motherhood, a critique of racism, the importance of family, and the quest for independence, personal dignity, and self definition. Angela uses her autobiography to explore subjects such as identity, rape, racism, and literacy. So, what does she use her autobiography for? She uses her autobiography to explore subjects or topics such as identity, rape, racism, and literacy. She also writes in a new, or rather in new ways about women's lives in a male dominated society. So she writes in new ways about women's lives in a male dominated society. Maya, the younger version of Angela and the book's central character, has been called a symbolic character for every black girl growing up in America. And this is what makes the book universal. This is what it becomes an important text for study in the master's classes everywhere and wherever you are reading about black feminism and the impact which this writer had. So, Angelo's description of being raped as an 18-year-old girl overwhelms the book, although it is presented briefly in the text. Another metaphor, that of the bird. So, what is metaphor? Metaphor is the implied comparison. So, metaphor that of a bird struggling to escape its cage is a central image throughout the work, which consists of a sequence of lessons about resisting racist oppression. So, another metaphor that is implied comparison, that of a bird which is struggling to escape its cage, is a central image throughout the work, which consists of a sequence of lessons about resisting stopping racist oppression. So, Angelo's treatment of racism provides a thematic unity to the book. What is the thematic unity? So, though there are different episodes, there are different parts of it, but finally, if we talk about the theme, the unity which is there in the theme is about racism. So, literacy and the power of words help young Maya cope with her bewildering world. Books become her refuge as she works through her trauma. So, it's Angelo's treatment of racism provides a thematic unity to the book. Literacy and the power of words help young Maya cope with her bewildering world. Books become her refuge as she works through her trauma. Caged Bird was nominated for a National Book Award in 1970 and remained on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for 2 years. So it was nominated for National Book Award in 1970 and remained on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for 2 years. It has been used in educational settings from high schools to universities, and the book has been celebrated for creating new literary avenues for the American memoir. So it has been used in educational settings from high schools to universities. If we talk about India, in many of the master's syllabus, you will see that this book has been referred to when we are studying racism, when we are talking about gender vis-a-vis racism. All these things are referred to. However, the book's graphic depiction of childhood rape, racism, sexuality has caused it to be challenged or banned in some schools and libraries. So, because of its graphic depiction, it's a realistic depiction of rape, racism, and sexuality, it has been challenged or banned in some schools and libraries. Now, we will be discussing Plato's ethics and politics in his work, The Republic. Plato's Republic centers on a simple question: is it always better to be just than unjust? The puzzles in Book 1 prepare for this question. So, what is the question? Is it always better to be just than unjust? So the puzzles in book 1 prepare for this question, and Glaucon and Adeimantus make it explicit at the beginning of book 2. To answer the question, Socrates takes a long way around, sketching an account of a good city on the grounds that a good city would be just, and that defining justice as a virtue of a city would help to define justice as a virtue of a human being. So, defining justice as a virtue of a city would help to define justice as a virtue of a human being. So, Socrates is finally close to answering the question after he characterizes. So, finally chose to answering the question after he characterizes justice as a personal virtue at the end of book 4, but he is interrupted and challenged to defend some of the more controversial features of the good city he has sketched. So, Socrates finally close to answering the question after he characterizes justice as a personal virtue at the end of book 4. But he is interrupted and challenged to defend some of the more controversial features of the good city he has sketched. In book 5 through 7, he addresses this challenge, arguing in effect that the just city and the just human being, as he has sketched them, are in fact good, are in principle possible. So, in books 5 through 7, he addresses this challenge, arguing in effect that the just city and the just human being, as he has sketched them, are in fact good and are in principle possible. After this long digression, Socrates in books 8 and 9 finally delivers three proofs that is always better to be just than unjust. So, after this long digression, Socrates in books 8 and 9 finally delivers three proofs that it is always better to be just than unjust. Then, because Socrates wants not only to show that it is always better to be just, but also to convince Glaucon and Adeimantus of this point, and because Socrates' proofs are opposed by the teachings of poets, he bolsters his case in Book 10 by indicating the poet's claims to represent the truth and by offering a new myth that is consonant with his proofs. So, because Socrates wants not only to show that it is always better to be just, but also to convince Glaucon and Adeimantus of this point, and because Socrates's he rather proofs are opposed by the teachings of poets, he bolsters his case in the book 10 by indicating the poet's claims to represent the truth and by offering new myth to support his own thought process. As this overview makes clear, the center of Plato's Republic is a contribution to ethics. Now it is important, what do we mean by ethics? So anybody who would like to tell me what do we mean by ethics can please go ahead. So ethics talks about the study of what is right and wrong in human behavior. Contribution to ethics, that is a discussion of what the virtue justice is and why a person should be just. Yet, because Socrates links his discussion of personal justice to an account of justice in the city and makes claims about how good and bad cities are arranged, the Republic sustains reflections on political questions as well. So, because so The idea of personal justice. Yes. So Socrates links his discussion of personal justice to an account of justice in the city and makes claims about how good and bad cities are arranged. The Republic sustains reflections on political questions as well. So, not that ethics and politics exhaust the concerns of the Republic. Now, as we were discussing the Plato's this work, we have to keep in mind the title once again. So, as we are discussing Plato's The Republic, as the name suggests, it is about this idea of the Republic, wherein the ethics and politics play an important role. So, the important question which it deals it is it always better to be just than unjust? And he puts that across in the book 1, wherein he prepares uh, people for this question, and Glaucon and Adeimantus make it explicit at the beginning of book 2 about this strategy, this idea. To answer the question, Socrates takes a long way around, sketching an account of a good city on the grounds that a good city would be just, and that defining justice as a virtue of a city would help to define justice as a virtue of a human being. Socrates is finally close to answering the question after he characterizes justice as a personal virtue at the end of book 4. So, as you are reading about it, and if possible, please read it, the actual text of it. If not, then the summary of these books and how each book has its own concern. So, book 1, book 2, and then we come to book 4. So, challenged and defend some of more controversial features of the good city he has sketched. You have to remember that this city has been sketched. In books 5 through 7, he addresses this challenge, arguing in effect that the just city and just human being, as he has sketched them, what just city and just human being as he has sketched them are in fact good and in principle possible. After this long digression in books 8 and 9, finally he delivers three proofs that is always better to be just than unjust. Then, because Socrates wants not only to show that it is always better to be just, but also to convince Glaucon and Adeimantus of this point. And because Socrates' proofs are opposed by the teachings of poets, he bolsters the case in Book 10 by indicating the poet's claims to represent the truth by offering a new myth that is consonant with his proofs. So he is constantly proving the points which he has highlighted. So, as this overview makes clear, the center of Plato's Republic is a contribution to ethics. As the name, the title which we started with talks about, contribution to ethics, a discussion of what virtue justice is and why a person should be just. So, as this overview makes it clear, the center of Plato's Republic is a contribution to ethics, a discussion of what the virtue justice is and why a person should be just. Yet, because Socrates links his discussion of personal justice to an account of justice in the city and makes claims about how good and bad cities are arranged, the Republic sustains reflections on political questions as well. Now, not that ethics and politics exhaust the concerns of Republic. The accounts or the account in books 5 through 7 of how such a city or how a just city and a just person are in principle possible is an account of how knowledge can rule, which includes discussion of what knowledge and its objects are. Moreover, the indictment of the poets involves a wide ranging discussion of art. This article, however, focuses on the ethics and politics of Plato's Republic. So, this article, however, focuses on ethics and politics of Plato's Republic. For more on what we can also see what Plato middle period metaphysics and epistemology. We can also refer to Plato's rhetoric and poetry. So this basically sums up Plato's idea, his ethics and politics in his work The Republic. And then, as we discussed, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, which again gives us the idea of black feminism, of women, of racism, of the plight of the black woman. And then the other work which we discussed about the prince, wherein it's by Machiavelli, and it talks about the different principalities and how it talks about the way to acquire and maintain political power, which includes 26 chapters, and an opening dedication by Lorenzo de Medici, wherein we discussed about the prince today. So with this, I kind of wind up today's session. We will be having one last session tomorrow, after which we will be winding up this topic. If you have anything to discuss, you can write in the chat box right now, since it is a live session. If not, you can always connect with me on my YouTube channel, which is Krishna's Canvas, for further discussion on any of the topics which have been taught here. If not, thank you so much, all of you. See you in the next lecture.